Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Florida State heading into 2025 is just one of those teams that has my brain in an absolute pretzel going into the 2025 year. And quite frankly, even the Florida State fans who follow this program pretty damn closely probably feel pretty dang similar to where I'm at with this Florida State team, where go back 2 years ago, this was one of the best teams we saw in the country in 2023. Obviously, a massive drop off in 2024. I think there are a lot of people that are 30 seconds into this episode, maybe casual college football fans that are checking in on Florida State, looking at me and saying, Jay, you idiot. This was a team that was 2-10 last year. How is there so much green on this schedule going into 2025? Now, one thing, I may be an idiot, but I will say this is a very, very different Florida State team than we saw in the 2024 year for a couple of different reasons. One, they used the transfer portal a lot over the last couple of weeks, or last couple of months, I should say. But more notably, what's different about how Florida State used the transfer portal this year as opposed to 12 months ago? Florida State took a lot of known commodities in the transfer portal this year. Whereas you go back 12 months ago, taking guys like DJU, taking guys like TJ Ferguson or Marvin Jones or a guy like Malik Benson, Florida State took a lot of risks in the transfer portal 12 months ago. This year, not so much. Like a lot of the guys specifically along the line of scrimmage that Florida State brought into this program are proven, bona fide, Power Four starters from their previous schools. That's just not how we talked about Florida State going into last year. The ceiling of this Florida State team might not be as high, but I think the floor is significantly higher than it was in the 2024 year. And I think that was clearly Mike Norvell and this coaching staff's goal. Now, not only from a personnel standpoint is Florida State different, I think one of the biggest storylines is I think they really did bring in a new coaching staff that I personally have a lot of confidence in. You know, Gus Malzahn, been doing it for a really long time, was a sitting Power Four head coach, comes and takes over the offense. You bring in Thomas Castellanos, a quarterback that ain't going to go top 10 in the NFL draft, but a quarterback that you feel confident that Gus Malzahn and Mike Norvell can create an offense that Thomas Castellanos can have success with. I think the biggest storyline here is Tony White coming in on the defensive side of the football. That is, to me, one of the best defensive coordinators in the country that Florida State landed. Not only do I think they're better off from a personnel standpoint, there's less question marks on this roster than there was 12 months ago. I think they're significantly better off from a coaching staff standpoint as well. Want to get a little bit nitty gritty into the schedule. Now, before we do, and as always, one, let it fly in the comment section. There might be some hot takes that I've included in this schedule prediction, you might say. Would love to hear from y'all, and Florida State fans would love to hear from you guys specifically in terms of what are the expectations that y'all have for Florida State going into 2025? That's something that I am still trying to figure out as well, and I don't think there's a better way to gauge expectation than from hearing from the Florida State fans from y'all in the comment section. Let it fly. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. One more thing I want to note here is from a personnel standpoint before we get into the schedule. Line of scrimmage. You know, you look at Florida State on both sides of the line of scrimmage, but specifically on offense. This is where they struggled the most. You ask any Florida State fan that watched every single game of that season in 2024, why did Florida State crater the way they did in 2024? To me, it was so clearly the offensive line. You know, they were one of the worst offenses running the football that you saw in the country. They were one of the worst offenses protecting the passer in the country. When you can't run the football, when you can't protect the passer, it does not matter what level of football you are playing. It's going to be hard to win football games. And that was the biggest problem with Florida State. Now, what did they do in this transfer portal? They didn't only replenish the offensive line. They went in and brought, bona fide Power Four starters. And in some cases, guys like Luke Pettibon at center, like some of the better offensive linemen that you saw available in the transfer portal. I look at the starting offensive line and say, well, I have some question marks about the depth of the offensive line. But in terms of what I think the starting five is going to look like going into the year, have a lot more confidence in this offensive line being a solid unit in the 2024 or 2025 year than it was in 2024, along with the new coach in Herb Hand, who I think the world of. Now, getting into the schedule, let's start. I mean, there's no way around it. This is a very, very difficult schedule going into 2025, right? You look at out of conference, you start the season with Alabama. At the end of the year, you go on the road to Gainesville, Florida, team that I think is really good. You play Miami and Clemson, who I think are far and away the two best teams in the ACC as we sit. Start with Alabama. I think this is an intriguing game. If I'm a college football fan, not just a Florida State fan, but a college football fan, and I'm looking for some early chaos to start the year, I'm circling that Alabama game. And it's not me getting up here in early March and saying Florida State's going to beat Alabama, book it. But I'm looking at Alabama and saying, all right, we still have the same question marks we did about Alabama in 2024 on the defensive side of the football. But I look at the offensive side and say, there's a very good chance. I mean, one, we know Alabama is going to be starting a quarterback that has very limited experience, right? It's going to be Austin Mack, Ty Simpson, or Keelan Russell. My personal evaluation of that Alabama quarterback room, I think there's a very good chance that you see a true freshman trot out there in Keelan Russell on the road against Florida State. Week one, you know that stadium's going to be buzzing. I'm not picking Florida State to beat Alabama. They got to show me it on the football field before I highlight that in anything other than red. And I think that Florida State fans probably agree with that. But I am saying that game could get really interesting right off the bat in 2025. East Texas A&M, win. Bye week. Kent State, win. Virginia, I do think Virginia could be a sneaky tough team in the ACC, but I do look at just player for player, bigger, stronger, faster. You know, Florida State has left some to be desired on the recruiting trail, but they still do recruit significantly better than a team like Virginia. I have confidence that Florida State wins that football game. Miami at home. Hard for me to sit here and take Florida State just because I look at Miami and say that they got a lot of boxes checked, right? You got a veteran quarterback in Carson Beck, and kind of assuming that he comes back and is the Carson Beck that we remember at Georgia, potentially the one that we remember in the 2023 year. You feel good about where Miami's at quarterback. They got a really good offensive line, should be able to run the football. And then the defense, they just got better, not only from a coaching staff standpoint, but they got better in the transfer portal as well. To me, Miami checks a lot of boxes and has some really high upside. Pitt, I like it. I think that's a really intriguing game in the month of October to kind of gauge where Florida State is at. I mean, again, Coach Narduzzi puts out really solid teams, and with that new offense, with Cade Bell and Eli Holstein, it's a different kind of challenge than it normally is playing Pitt. But I think Florida State's got a really good chance there, especially at home. You go across the country to play Stanford and then Wake Forest at home. Both games, I'm a Wake Forest alum, so this ain't no shot at Wake Forest, but these are two games where you can kind of throw out the storylines and say we trust Florida State because they have better football players, bigger, stronger, faster than teams like Stanford and Wake Forest. On the road at Clemson, I think Clemson's a top 5 team in the country. I think this team that can legitimately win a national championship. Hard for me to pick Florida State going on the road to beat Clemson. Virginia Tech, you get them at home, which is a really big storyline because you do not want to have to go on the road to play Virginia Tech in the middle of November. But I will say this, Virginia Tech to me kind of just, for lack of better terms, missed their opportunity in the 2024 year. I look at Virginia Tech in 2024, Kyron Drones, really intriguing quarterback. You returned pretty much that whole team last year, and then you made some intriguing additions in the transfer portal. They didn't really capitalize. And now they're going into 2025 with just a lot more question marks than you had with Virginia Tech a year ago. I like Florida State's chances at winning that football game at home. Then you go on the road to NC State, and this is a game that normally I would never highlight in green. And I think Florida State fans who follow ACC football closely know this as well. It's hard to go up and win on the road at NC State. This NC State team feels different. Very similar to Virginia Tech. Well, I had high expectations for NC State in the 2024 year, and it went downhill fast for Dave Doran and the Wolfpack. They didn't do much in the transfer portal with the not very good team that we saw in the month of November. I'm pretty confident Florida State wins that football game. Then you go on the road to play Florida. Anything can happen in those kind of games, but I am a big fan of Florida going into 2025. Vegas has the win total at 7.5. And Vegas is a believer. And Florida State going into the 2025 year, there's a lot of games that I think Florida State should win. I think how well this coaching staff can hit the ground running can kind of dictate some of these other toss-up games and even some of the games that I have highlighted in red. Because we know Florida State has a base amount of talent, and I think they did a much better job in the transfer portal than they did 12 months ago. As we sit right now, this is how it shakes out for me. In the summer, we'll do an official prediction where I'll give you all a number in terms of the record I think Florida State has, but I want to let spring practice play out. I want to let the spring transfer portal play out because we obviously know it, one, can shake up how we look at Florida State, but it certainly can shake up how we look at some of these other teams as well. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, to the Florida State fans, please let it fly in the comment section. What y'all put in the comment section in terms of expectations you guys have for Florida State, largely going to be my expectations for Florida State in 2025 because I'm sitting here right now a little bit damn confused about this football team. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.